We are in a small black box theatre in Delhi. It's called Studio Safdar. This is named after Safdar Hashmi, who was one of the founders of Janam. Safdar was an actor, director, writer, singer, activist, organizer, teacher, and a very lovely man. He was killed when we were in performance on the 1st of January 1989. We were attacked on the 1st, he died on the 2nd. This was a play that we were doing in support of workers just on the outskirts of Delhi. The backstory, the history of this attack, what went into it is that in 1988, in November, there had been a 7-day strike of the working class across Delhi. But that was preceded by a 3-day strike in 1987 and a 1-day strike in 1986. So, in other words, the working class movement, the labor movement was gaining strength and was becoming more and more militant, from a 1-day strike to a 3-day strike to a 7-day strike. So, we had prepared a play, and this play had been done for about maybe 20 odd days before the strike. And it got performed in a lot of the factory areas. The play became very popular. So towards the end of the campaign, I remember reaching a particular place where we had to perform, and even though we had not performed in that area before, we would land up there would be hundreds of workers waiting for us, and just the enthusiasm, etc., was amazing. And then some of the slogans that they were shouting were slogans that Safdar had written for the play. These were new slogans, but they had spread, they had become the slogans of the strike. After the strike ended, then we worked on a revised version of the same play, and this revised version took in account the fact that the strike had happened and what had changed and what had not changed, and so on and so forth. And this is a play that we started performing end of December 1988. We had done a few performances, and then on the 1st of January 1989 we were going out to perform to a place called Jhandapur. So we were supposed to perform 3 or 4 performances that day, but in the middle of the first performance we were attacked. There were 2 people who got killed that day. Safdar was grievously injured, he died the next day, but there was a Nepali migrant worker, a young man called Ram Bahadur, and Ram Bahadur was killed on the spot on the 1st, he was shot dead. And the idea behind this kind of brutality and the sheer violence, and the fact that all of this violence got perpetrated completely in the open, it was an attack on the working class movement, it was retaliation for the strike. It was meant to act as a warning to workers. It was meant to say that, look, you continue to organize yourselves, this is what is going to happen. Even when he was in hospital, before he had actually died, on the 1st itself, after the attack, people had started coming to the hospital in large numbers. On the night of the 1st, I remember there were at least 200 odd people at the hospital who had turned up there. And I want to make this point that this is something that happened before the age of cell phones, internet, SMSs, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. None of that existed. It was just basically, old landline phones. But this news of the attack on Janam and the fact that Safdar was critical and then that he died went viral long before we knew the word viral in this sense. It had a huge impact in India, huge. We started getting, within hours, we started getting reports of protest demonstrations that were happening across the country. Thousands of people took part in these demonstrations. In the funeral procession of Safdar himself on the 3rd of January, there must have been about 15,000 people who turned up. And then on the 4th of January, less than 48 hours after Safdar had died, we went back to that spot, and we performed the interrupted play again. Mala said, well, we just have to go back and perform. And I can't remember much else because I was still under shock. But I remember thinking to myself, what? How are people going to be able to perform? But just one look at Mala and I knew that, she was determined. And so it had to be done. Just had to be done. We are not going to pick up guns and start shooting people. The only way that we know how to respond is through our art. And so what do? We go back and perform. And that's a picture there of that performance. As you can see from the picture, there are thousands of people who came. It was just extraordinary. In retrospect, I think it was the best thing we did. It was just the most important single performance of a street play in the history of India. It's something that galvanized the protest. It's something that had a huge impact. It inspired thousands of people across the country. All of this also became a creative force. And on the 12th of January, quite spontaneously, I don't even know who decided this or how it got decided, but quite spontaneously on the 12th of April, not January, on the 12th of April, which is Safdar's birthday, it was decided that this would be a day that we would all observe as National Street Theatre Day. And that's a tradition that has continued all these years, 26, 27 years later. It continues. So the 12th of April every year is Street Theatre Day across India. But it happened not because there was any centralized agency that took this decision. It's something that quite spontaneously sort of came out of the energy of that time. And the fact that there were hundreds of theatre groups that came, that firstly got formed at that time as a response to what had happened. Secondly, there were many theatre groups that had been dormant, that came back to life, and of course there were the active theatre groups as well. On the 12th of April 1989, we had reports which we had compiled and documented at the time. We had reports of something like 30,000 performances that took place on that one single day across the country. It was stunning. We find that every time we go out and go to another city and perform, for instance, the warmth and the love and the affection with which people greet us is extraordinary. I mean, there are people who still come to us in different cities and who tell us, this is what I was doing when I heard the news. Especially in smaller towns, who meet us to date and who talk about what they were doing that day. They talk about what Safdar meant to them, even though they may not have met Safdar ever in their lives. The performance on the 4th was, of course it was for Safdar, of course, but it was something much larger than Safdar himself. It caught the mood of the times. There was a great deal of anger in the country. And I think that the performance that we did on the 4th of January 1989 captured some of that anger. It spoke on behalf of forces that were much larger than us. So we became the instruments for what was said that day. But what was said that day was not something that we as individuals alone were saying. It's something that we became the expression for a large number of people across, in a sense we became the voice of history. It was a small voice, it's the small voice of history, but it was the voice of history.